Welcome to Virtual Wednesdays. We are so thrilled that you're able to join us tonight. My name is Francesca D'Alessio, and I'm the Senior Manager of Public Programs here at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. I am so proud and excited to introduce this powerful collaboration between SeeBlackWomxn and the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. SeeBlackWomxn is a collective of incredible artists and was formed as a response to the lack of opportunity and support for Black women in the art world. This collaboration is a call for accountability to engage with critical, long overdue conversations about power and representation in our cultural institutions. As educators, we are determined to expand the narrative and provide multiple access points to art. These programs create an opportunity to do so by centering the work, contributions, and expressions of Black women. We pose the questions: whose culture is this? Whose narrative is this? Who relates to this piece? Who feels seen here? Who feels inspired? The questions are endless, but we hope that this collaboration opens the possibility in the collective consciousness of radical imagination. Please join me in welcoming SeeBlackWomxn.
Hello, I'm Dana King, and I want to welcome you to my studio. I also want to acknowledge that my studio sits on the land of the Ohlone tribes of California, stolen from them. In fact, all land in this country was stolen from Indigenous peoples. Today's conversation with Lisa Dent, Tracy Brown, and Rosie Gordon-Wallace was extraordinary. It's a far-ranging conversation that centers on Black art and Black artists. I hope you enjoy
it. Earth is ghetto, I wanna leave, can you beam me up? I'm out on the street by the corner store, you know the one on 15th. Got a bright shirt on, so I'm easy to see. I've been down here stranded indefinitely. I can't reach my planet, but I need to leave. You should see these people, it's hard to believe how they treat each other. It's hard to conceive. Oh, Earth is ghetto, I wanna leave. Oh, Earth is ghetto, I wanna leave. I wanna leave.
I'm Dana King, and I create Black bodies in bronze. I create public art because it inhabits space, and space is power. And what motivates me is that we are not out in public. Our stories are not out in public. The opportunity to come upon a story of an African descendant, either intentionally or accidentally, is so limited. And so that's what motivates me. And we're an integral part of American history. And unfortunately, we're not in the history books. And so it's my mission to provide an opportunity for a learning when people encounter a sculpture. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of sculptures created by African descendants. I like to think that art can help restore some of that lack of information, and also give people an opportunity to drill down into not just that history, but their own history through the work that I do.
Hello, everyone. I am Rosie Gordon-Wallace, and I am a curator and founder of Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator in Miami. It is an incubator space primarily geared for emerging artists from the Caribbean, Black and Brown, and we stand on the backs of African-American artists, and that has been recognized from the very beginning. We're a 25-year-old organization, and we go to the Caribbean every year, doing each country 3 times, but not consecutively. So there are 3 countries on the board every year, and then we go back consecutively 3 times. So just came back from Panama. where we did a international cultural exchange, looking at West Indian bodies that Olive Sinker talks about dying to better themselves. Can you imagine that we left the Caribbean, Jamaica and Barbados and St. Lucia to go to Panama, that isthmus, to basically die. 48% of the folks that went to work on the canal did not return home. And so the journey there, this past 9 days, I get goosebumps, honestly, just talking about it. The journey there was a personal journey for me, because I had uncles and aunts that we grew up hearing that they went to the Caribbean. But being in Panama, this was it's my third time going, but the first time going with 9 other artists. And all of us, there's an African American, there was a young American artist, Jewish American artist. I always take a white person with me, because I say, why am I telling the story to the choir, right? If we don't do that, then the story never gets really understood. And we went to cemeteries, we visited collections. I was just telling Dana about it. But the reason I'm bringing it up again is Black bodies, brown bodies, yellow bodies around the globe are suffering. We saw the disparity in Panama, stark disparity. And so that's what I came back yesterday. So I am full of the global South's pain, and also it's indelible and a memory of our pain living in the United States. And so that's where I am today, looking to this conversation with you beautiful ladies to bring some joy and levity, because despite the pain and suffering, many had children. There was love, there was play, there was imagination. And when we talked to the descendants, we got that feeling of the stories, of the parables that they told their kids. So it's not all gloom and doom. We know how to love, we know how to play. What we need to, I think what I'm offering today is, how do we work through the trauma that we cannot yet recognize in our bodies? How do we work through it so that when it comes at us, we have a plan, so that the next generation can have a recipe to figure this out. And that's where I am today, but happy to be here with you all.
Hi, I just put myself on mute so that my animal noises wouldn't come through. So hopefully Langston and Sister Rosetta will be kind to me while I'm speaking. So I am originally from the Bay Area, where Dana is now. And I went to Howard University and then went to New York after. So I basically was a theater kid in high school that found the visual arts. And I think one of the reasons is because for me, the visual arts allowed me to, think and through things and learn about different cultures without needing to perform that back initially, right? To be as verbal. That's something about the visual arts and the work that I was seeing allowed me to understand not just the history and the materiality, but the emotions and the complicated ideas around some of these objects. And I learned pretty quickly that not everyone wants to spend a lot of time looking. So I feel like some of my most important early roles I didn't understand to be as significant, but they led me to be much more of an artist advocate than a historian or just a museum professional. Mm-hmm. So I started to really look for opportunities where I could be finding money and material or resources for artists. And so I've worked in different kinds of organizations, had a gallery, a commercial gallery for a while, have worked in a grant making, but now I'm working at a, what you might call now like a 30-year sort of traditional alternative space, like it used to be called. And with the idea that this was started by artists, that it's meant to provide a platform for artists to share their work with the public. And I think what I'm sort of thinking about now most is how do we make space for experimentation with Blackness included in all of that work, and talk about the history of experimentation in the visual arts with Black and brown bodies. And I love that you mentioned the Global South too, because I think that is another something that I'm thinking about quite deeply.
So I too am a Bay Area native. I'm a San Francisco native. My name is Tracy Brown, and I'm an artivist or an arts activist. I'm also a visual griot. I started as a photographer when I was 11 years old. My dad gave me my first camera. And so I'm a self-taught artist, and I really do my best to utilize my own work and also the work that I curate, because I'm also an independent curator, to illustrate realities that are important to the Afro-diasporic community. Um, I'm definitely devoted to promoting Pan-African unity through recognition of our interconnectedness through culture and faith and life practice. And so, I look at the arts and also look at the spiritual arts as an opportunity for us to recognize the cultural continuity that exists throughout the African diaspora. Um, I also do quite a bit of capacity building work with community arts organizations. I grew up in Wajumbe, which was an organization in San Francisco that was housed at the what is now called the AAACC, but previously it was called the Western Addition Culture Center. And Nasisi Kayu Ibaye, she just made her transition a couple years ago. She was the director of Wajumbe, and it was this amazing dance company. So all the African artists who came through the Bay Area, they came through Wajumbe. So Malunga Cascalord and was a part of Wajumbe, Alicia Pierce, like all of these amazing artists, Val Sarant, everybody was a part of Wajumbe. So that was a community and a culture that I grew up in. And as much as I hated it, because kids never want to, I wanted to be at home watching cartoons on Saturday. And my mother had me dance classes, and I hated dancing. I was like the worst dancer ever. I'm like a Black person anomaly. I cannot fry food and I cannot dance. So I hated it. But, growing up in Wajumbe was so beneficial for me, because I was around people who were staunch advocates for love of self through love of culture. And that really stuck with me. And I want to see future generations have the opportunity to benefit from that. But also, I'd like to see adults have the opportunity to benefit from that. I see so many of my own people who are not in love with their own culture, or they're in love with this idea of Blackness or Africanity, where it's like culture is just a costume. You put on fabrics and a lot of beads, and you put your hands out and you sway around, but there's no like substance to it. So I do the work that I do to document our practices and our culture as an act of motion, but also as an act of self-determination.
Okay, thanks for coming. This is everything. This is just everything. And I want to, Tracy, thank you. And Rosie and Lisa, thank you. It really sets up this conversation that here are all these beautiful, long-lasting, traditional connections that we all share. And they're embedded in the work that we do and the people that we support and the work that they do. And now we're in this time when museums and major galleries, they all want a piece of it, right? And my question is, now that they're all jumping on the bandwagon of Blackness, do they even see us? Do they feel us? Do they hear us? Or is it just ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching? Is it just money?
So I got into UCLA my freshman year of college. And by the end of the year, I'd made the decision that I was going to study art history. And if I was going to do that, I wanted to do it through an African diasporic lens. And I partially knew that because I have older sisters who were struggling in college, you know, being one of the few Black people at such and such school trying to study, right? And so I went to Howard, and it's taken me a long time to realize that my studies, which then led me to work in larger nationally recognized organizations, that I was willing to learn the other histories that my colleagues weren't willing to then learn themselves. And I mean, I really just understood this like 5 or 6 years ago, that, you know, yes, I want Black people working in museums, but what you're also telling me is that your contemporary art curators or your American art curators are unwilling to learn Native American art history, African American art history, Chinese American art history, and instead want us to kind of plug that hole for them a little bit, which can seem like an opportunity. But I also just want to say we haven't quite gotten past Black women holding all of the work, and that often needs to get done in these institutions. And so I think I just want to start there, because I think, as optimistic as I can be, there's certainly more Black people working in museums than when I started. I think I'm still interested to see how much it can actually be embedded through the entire narrative that is being told about these objects in the collection. And that we don't actually know often how many objects are moving into these museum collections. And I would say it's still predominantly white and male. And beyond that, what I learned as a curator in a collection institution is that they might purchase things by Black and brown people or women, but those works are always undervalued. And so then the museums don't spend the money to take care of them, because those, you know, it's a numbers game. It's an insurance value, you know. Oh, well, we really need to take care of this painting by this man because it's valued at, you know, such and such $1 million. And these other things in the collection may come out for an exhibition, but they're not tended to in the way that I think other objects are in the museum. And I think that makes me worried, because one curator at an institution can't get all of that done. You need support from conservation and education and communication and all of these other departments, which are still primarily white.
I think that that's a really important point. And when we have institutions, or I recently heard someone share a quote, and they were talking about, I can't remember the exact quote, but essentially they were saying, so often development, or not development, progress is defined as making space for people of color in institutions that are designed to uphold white supremacy, which many of these arts institutions are. So even when they hire, they might decide, okay, well, we're going to make a diversity move and we're going to hire this one person. You know, they're either hiring somebody that they feel is safe, you know, that's the safe Black person that's going to fall into alignment with what their ideals are, because, you know, we know all of our kinfolk are not our kinfolk. So they will often hire the safe Blacks, so to speak. Or they'll hire someone who brings their full self, but they're like, no, we really just hired you to come in here and say colorful little Negro things. So we want you to stick with that. And if you go outside of that, then you're raucous or you're whatever. We also have folks who are still in this space, because white supremacy isn't just part of it is not just part of the institution and regulations, it's ingrained in the humans. So we bring ourselves with ourselves wherever we go. And if you're a white supremacist at home, or you have a certain mentality at home, and you have prejudicial ideas about other people at home, you're bringing that to work. So we'll often enter these institutions where you see certain work being selected, because even though it's done by Black artists, it's consistent with the ideas of acceptability, or even the ideas of sort of the limitations associated with Black culture. If you start talking, especially if you're talking about cultural continuity, you're talking about classical African civilizations and societies, if people aren't even in a place where they have come away from this belief that people of African descent have no culture, have no history, have no background, they're going to reject any art that is not reflective of those limited ideas. So, to answer your question very briefly, I don't know that they necessarily see us, and I don't know if these institutions ever will. I'm not that optimistic, and that would be a lot of work for me to try to fix that. So what now we're in a place where we have to do is figure out, okay, how do we navigate the experiences of working with these institutions? We know their mindset. We know that it's highly unlikely that they're going to really change. How do we work? How do we navigate the experience of working with them? Because they do have a certain platform that we need. We need to make sure that we are represented in those spaces, given the identity that they've been assigned as keepers of culture and information and upholding X, Y, and Z. But then also, how do we bring, how do we suggest and even demand change in these institutions so that something real can happen? I think it's multi-layered, but to answer the question, no, I don't think that they see us.
The fact that looking at the archive, look, these institutions have African American, Black and brown works for a long time. The gap widened over a period of time. We need to fill that gap. So what are the responsibilities? I'm looking at this article in 2020, on the rise, 47 curators and arts leaders who took new positions in 2019 and 2020. 47 that look like us, right? We haven't heard anything from them since they got there, because you get an office, most of them don't have an office. You get a little cubicle, and it takes you a year to figure out to speak up in a board meeting. All right. I served on the board down here for 3 years. You can't even say a word. 50 rich people talking about how they're moving their money around, and you're in the room. So what happens to that living archive? How are we going to be able to impact it? Indigenous. What is our responsibility in these spaces to have an analytical view of what the Indigenous work is or should be, and how do we bring that forward? Antiquity has happened in cultures all over. It's not just white cultures that have antiquity. When they were living, we were also living. How is it that our stories always have this pathological lens? We always lead with poverty. We always lead with sadness. We always lead with pain and suffering. That's not how we are in our community. The reason that we've been able to thrive, we did not die. We are here. We're thriving, and we are middle class, and some of us are wealthy, irresponsible, but wealthy. So when we get to these positions, how do we flex? Yeah. Is really my concern. And when you're not practicing flexing, when you're not able to speak up from a place, this is not about education. We're the most educated race in this time now. We are degreed to the Red Sea. How do we bring this in an authentic way? Where does the fear? I have right here on my pad, fear. How do we get over the fear? The fear of mistrust, the fear of the fact that we fear them. They fear us, but we also fear them, because we fear the power that the institutions have over our careers. If you misspeak in a meeting, you're blacklisted. Nobody else hires you. That's why there is no, yeah, you get backlisted. Don't speak with that lady. Don't work with her because she's a troublemaker. She's going to come to your institution and cause trouble. Never you mind, it's good trouble that we're causing. So it's problematic to have 47 Black curators. And I haven't heard a peep out of them. I've been doing this work in Miami for 25 years, working here in a most, I don't even use the word diverse anymore.
Yeah.
In a most complicated city. Because remember now, we have Cubans down here, white passing Cubans,
Yeah.
okay? As well as the old South, okay? So it's painful for me as an older person in this industry, watching you young people come up and there hasn't been a platform for you. There are no mentors. Laurie Sims is gone. Leslie Hammond is gone. You know what I'm saying? The folks that have been in the industry that have fought some battles painfully have been gone. So how do we now strategize to create safe places for you to test and experiment and navigate and do some good work? That's really where I want to put my next couple of years of energy in. You want to come down to Miami to navigate down here? Come spend a month with me. Come, let's do the work. Let me show you my Miami, the Miami that has all of this cultural diversity, right? Let me show you why it is that the work can't get done. That is what I'm interested in now. We know the problems. We can, all of us with our eyes closed can write them down.
Yeah.
But the strategy, the real work comes in how we're going to strategize so that you have a safe place, Lisa, and you have a safe place, Tracy, and Dana, you have a safe place to call Sus at night and say, you know what happened to me today? This is what happened. How do I attack this?
Yeah.
That's what that's where I am putting the energy that I have left in this.
And also, you think about institutions like the Caribbean Cultural Center or Museo del Barrio, founded by Marta Moreno Vega, Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, who was one of my professors at NYU, who is just like, she is phenomenal. Yeah. And she's all about getting the academy outside the doors, and recognizing the artistic value of our cultural arts that we do every day.
She's a good friend of mine. Yeah.
Wonderful, yes. And, that's the backbone upon which that institution was founded. But when you were talking, Rosie, about having these institutions where we have a safe place, the Caribbean Cultural Center is definitely one of those spaces. And I think they're doing some phenomenal work, as well as the African American Art and Culture Complex in San Francisco. Those institutions are few and far between.
Yeah.
El Museo. Sorry. El Museo over the last, actually 10 years, maybe longer, has been kind of fascinating to watch how they navigate this, the South American, for lack of a better term right now, curators, or, I don't know if you remember, they had a Spanish curator that came in, and it was really fraught. And we're board members at cultural institutions across New York who did not understand that conversation. They don't understand the difference within these cultures, and it was shocking to me that they didn't understand the difference between Spain and Puerto Rico. It was as if it was the same conversation. And that was when I began to really understand how little work my colleagues were doing to understand the world in the way that I was. I was trying to see everything and read and do it. And no, my colleagues were basically like, yeah, let me know. Like, you can write that. You can do that.
Right. So I guess I'm feeling like, Rosie mentioned the 47 who have disappeared. They've been hired and disappeared. They'll come back up and resurface February for Black History Month, right? That why don't we invest in our culturally specific institutions and raise them up and raise us up from within that? Why do we continue to elevate things like being hired and shows in predominantly white spaces? And because sure as the day is long, they're going to put us back on the shelf when they're tired of dealing with us, looking at our art, not understanding it, not knowing how to promote it. They're just going to say, okay, look, your time is up, right? So why do we wait?
But Dana, they're going to say you failed. That's the thing about opportunity. When given an opportunity, when it's not fertile, when you're not being nurtured, is that when you're discarded as a failure. And that is another layer of trauma that is hard to overcome. I have failed. I went in and I tried. I did all these programs. The programs just didn't fit. Well, they don't fit because there isn't a space for you. You're not given the proper resources. You're not given the time to massage the ideas. You're not allowed to experiment. What word is that? So that is what I'm concerned about. Our young professionals who want the validation. Let's not fool ourselves. You get appointed to MoMA. You're validated in some way, right? The Whitney, we're Rue at the Whitney trying to do some really heavy lifting work there. But when you're not doing what the board, we have not spoken about the board. The board of these institutions don't look like us. Very rarely do we have anybody of color, anybody of substance, financial substance sitting on these boards. So the boards run the institutions. And if you're not aligned with what the boards want, you're going to be a failure.
And remember, they run these institutions that are about something they have no background in usually, right? So they're not really understanding cultural history necessarily. They understand, real estate or legal matters, and the assumption is that there aren't anyone like us that understands those as well.
Or they understand how to inherit.
Yeah, they don't find them, right?
Yeah. And how to count the value of the items that we have allowed them to count. We are the ones that are constantly being analyzed and dissected. Why do we have to tell someone anymore about what makes us function?
Yeah. I think the nice thing though about this modern time is that with technology, more and more people are asserting themselves independently and saying, you know what, I don't even understand the intricacies of trying to move through these institutions, trying to get noticed. And you know what, I'm not going to wait for somebody to validate me. I'm putting my work out there on Instagram. I'm doing a Patreon. I'm, using these different technological means for getting information out there about my art. And some people are really willing to hustle and make it. I think also it's encouraging to see more folks who are being watched by, latter generations, like Swizz Beatz and Alicia Keys, and even like Beyonce and Jay-Z, really collecting art and saying, look at this,
Serena Williams. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So many people who are saying, well, on the one hand, there's all this bling bling and all this, ridiculousness and the champagne and the bottles popping and the Balenciaga and the blah blah, but collecting art, now that's baller, that's cool, that's that's what I'm doing to show my status. And I like that idea, because some people are gonna have to start somewhere. And even though folks might not be getting the depth of understanding, I like the idea of young people watching this and saying, "Ooh, I want to do that too," because that means something. Yeah. And hopefully we can capitalize on that. And it's just one more point. The other thing I want to say about that is that, if I may, Miss Rosie, one more point. The other thing I want to say about that is that it gives us a wonderful opportunity for education. So we have the opportunity to educate folks in our community about why it is important to buy our work, why is it important to support our institutions. What does that mean? What is the value? And also show people how art can be used as an investment. So, I know a woman who sent her kid to college on by selling a couple of pieces of art that she had bought decades previously. So there's something to be said for teaching people in our community to understand the cultural investment as well as the tangible investment associated with our art. Thank you very much, Miss Rosie.
You're talking about self-love as a community of people, that we have to love ourselves in order to lift ourselves up and to do just that, to buy our own work and to collect it and to watch it appreciate and to lift up young artists.
Exactly.
Can I just mention something else? There was a woman locally who is considering a run for mayor, and there was a conversation. She's just starting to open up and talk to people, and more than once, she described herself as the child of civil rights era Black people. And later I thought, why did she need to say that over and over again? And I thought, I think many ways people are learning that there are, sorry, Tracy. There are people that are younger, their parents were not hurt by Jim Crow in the South, right? That there are parents who didn't love themselves. They didn't grow up and learn to love themselves if they grew up in the US in the way that I think I was able to a little bit more, and then the generation next a little bit more, right? So what I'm hearing the young Black curators and arts professionals talking about, they're talking to each other. They are reaching out, sort of like, oh, this work happened, this happened. And they're getting, it's not exactly mentorship, but they have someone to talk to. But I do feel like they're doing those conversations without the history, or sort of understanding where they do have opportunity and potentially access in a way that people didn't before. And what does that mean? But I think Rosie really has a point. I think what's keeping them from being very strategic is the need to be identified, and there need to be, what was the word you used, Rosie? It was validated, right? And the validation may be different if you have a job at MoMA versus, putting yourself out there, but on Instagram or whatever, the way Tracy was mentioning. But I do think when I was younger, we weren't asked to professionalize ourselves so early and like have this way that we are announcing that I'm a curator as early. You were a assistant doing a variety of things until you were like 35 before a lot of people. So it's been a challenge for me to understand where the young people are versus what it was before, because I find that they are expecting more out of their work than I think I used to. And so I'm hoping that the momentum doesn't stop, because I don't see those large institutions changing. Black institutions, I think, are struggling with the civil rights era leadership of people that don't love themselves in the way that we should. They're really, as someone who went to Howard and worked in other Black institutions, there's real struggle there because people didn't get to go to the best schools. They didn't get that love. They didn't get all these things, and you're trying to work together, and it can become fraught. And then people want to know why these culturally specific institutions are not thriving. I think for Black people, it's because there was a generation of people you told weren't good enough to do that in deeply. And even if you were, the one to go out and really try and do it, there's so much hurt there. And I just want these young people to stick with it, because I don't think they have that hurt in the same way as like my father did. Yeah.
I can't agree more. As I said, I just came back from Panama, and for this safe space, the institutions there that are Black and Brown run, Black institutions, are struggling with technology, they're struggling with resources. Although they're run by the government, the disparity between the other museums, and History Museum, the Contemporary Museum, and our Antillean Museum, as it's called, was stark, really, really stark. And so you bring up a really valid point. The thing that I want to also address, the fact about young curators. Remember now, our colleges and universities are graduating this plethora of young, bright scholars, sometimes straight from their BFAs all the way to PhDs, with very little life experience. In my time, and I noticed that Tracy gave me my bow by saying Miss Rosie, which is I found quite funny. Here I am trying to look young and perky.
And you do.
And she called me under the bus, but it's all right.
Oh no.
But what I think used to happen in the curatorial world is that you became an apprentice. You know, you worked, as you said, and you learned to hone your own voice, and you had your own style, and then you were given an opportunity to do a group show. And then so now these young curators, first of all, they can write, they're bright, they have their own opinion, and they're impatient. And so when you put those ingredients, which I find admirable, into institutions that have been in a pressure cooker for the entire life, you must have spillover. It's not going to work. So how do you go in? You know, my mom used to tell me you get more with honey than with salt, you know, because as a 20-year-old, I was snapper, you know. Now, not so much. Now I try to figure out who has the power in the room. How do I make sure that my interest is aligned with them? It takes work. So if you're coming in and you think you would kind of know it all, and you probably do know a lot, you're not going to be patient to do that kind of work. And who is going to suffer? The artist coming behind. I always tell my young artists, don't leave so many dead bodies. You know, you can shoot a few, but don't leave so many dead bodies, because when you leave dead bodies, the door gets slammed behind us. And so that's why I bring this around to sisterhood. I don't know about you. I have friends from high school still that I can call, friends that I don't have to dress up for. I can just say, man, I feel so terrible today. They don't even ask me why. I just feel bad. I don't have to tell them why. We need those spaces where when you're working on something, Dana, and it's just not working, you can call and you can say, my deadline is here. Is there anyone that can help me to get to the deadline? Because our other colleagues, white colleagues, have it. Their uncles, their grandparents, there's some influential person somewhere that they can call and get it done. And so as we build wealth, because I live in a capitalistic society, I'm a socialist, but I live in a capitalistic society. I understand the power of money. How do we use that power as we get into these institutions, if we're going to make change, you know, so that people are not afraid. They're afraid of us when we come. Anyway, just our bodies makes them fearful.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Ms. Rosie, I said they are afraid of us just by being present. Our bodies causes fear, causes this kind of anxiety. So how are we going to be able to do the work and do all of that pacifying as well, and still do bombastic work? It's hard. Yeah. It's really difficult, you know.
It's hard. It's interesting, Rosie, that so I lived in New York, and then I left 10 years, and then I came back, and I was amazed how many people recognized me from whatever, and that they were uncomfortable that I was there. I think the way you're saying, right? And they made a point of remembering who I was in a way that I didn't pay attention to them in the same way, right? And I think it took me a while to realize that my presence in any meeting was so, layered with various expectations, that, and I think it really, for me, came to a head when I went back to work at a collecting institution in the middle of the country. And I think we've sort of tiptoed around this, but really the expectation was for me to show Black artists in a way that wasn't articulated. And so then when I didn't for a couple of shows, I do feel like there was a feeling, what is the use of me if I'm not going to do that for the institution, right? And I think that I've seen only when a curator, one of the young 47, when we're able to bring in something about queerness, or however you would like to say, sort of like, then there seems to be some room for multiple identities, but for some reason, the culturally specific institutional realm, we don't have that yet. So I'm still very curious to see what can happen in some of the smaller institutions to move us into a space where we can show the complexity of our identities.
And how do we?
That's my question is about this transition from the institutions of old to the institutions today, what their expectation is from us as people, because if you go, there's so many museums that haven't transitioned. They see African American art as African art. Like all they have are masks and, ancient, beautiful tribal art. But that's it. It doesn't expand beyond that. We're not seen as being able to create other types of work, be it representational to abstract to whatever. And so we mentioned bringing up the children, right? Starting with them. I mean, they need to meet artists. They need to know that you can have a life as an artist. I mean, the only school tour I ever went on, and granted I'm much older, was to the bread factory. I didn't even know you could be an artist. Yeah. And then, okay, let's say that we start to grow them in that way when they're small, then they get up to university and it costs $60,000 a year today to go to Yale, to get your MFA at Yale. I mean, that's insane. It's insane. So in order for us to be in those institutions where we stop looking at just masks and other tribal things as Black art, right? We have to be there. We have to be there. So that encouragement has to begin, and we have to lift it up through the age of, college. And I worry that we're not doing that. And then conversely, I'm worrying, Tracy, you could speak to this, that unless you go through that system and you come out with this shining golden platinum degree, that your art isn't of value.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And or they have this system where they're like, oh, you don't have enough experience because you didn't do an internship and you didn't do all these things that require you to have an amount of disposable income that most of us just don't have, especially in the Bay Area. I'm like, who has time to be doing an internship? Even when I tried to like break into the arts professionally, they're like, you haven't had enough experience. I remember applying to a cultural institution here in the Bay Area and was told you don't have enough experience in the arts. I was like, I have a master's from NYU from Tisch. So what are you talking about? That's A and B. I've been an artist. I'm self-taught, but I've been an artist for essentially my whole life. I literally had to tell the woman, there is a photo of me on your homepage. How can you organization's homepage performing. How can you tell me that I don't have enough experience? But this is like well, you don't have a BFA and you don't have a this and you don't have a that. I didn't have the luxury of a BFA. I have a bachelor's in speech pathology, audiology, and early childhood special education. And it served me in some ways, but I didn't have the luxury of getting an art degree because my parents was like, child, please, you better get a job. And art is not going to do it. But
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that in terms of looking at the work that is focused on mass and the tribal art, et cetera, I feel like there's an opportunity for both and. That work needs to be recontextualized instead of it being put out as the, oh, look at the primitive art and look at we need, excuse me, we need to stand up and say, excuse me, but let's look at the science in this. Excuse me, but this has not been presented in a way that illustrates the depth of this work. Many of the pieces that you see in these institutions, whether it's masks or dishes or whatever, they don't have this understanding of the holistic reality of art made by people in ancient and classical cultures of African descent. So not looking at the science behind the numbers, the spiritual science, the depth, not looking at the evidence of, the first manifestations of culture and community and exploration of one's relationship with the divine, not really looking at that work as deep, just looking at it as clay pots and carvings and really seeing the depth of it. So I think it's up to us when we're curating to not only illustrate that, but also show how those themes manifest themselves in modern work. In terms of the institutions and sort of this movement through generations. I'm thinking about what Rosie and Lisa were talking about in terms of, institutions being peopled by folks who came from the sort of civil rights era. And you sometimes, being a younger person, you go into these institutions or these situations, you're excited, you're encouraged, you're optimistic, and the folks are like, you pull this institution from my cold dead hands. It's like they don't want to let you in, they don't want to allow you to help, it's a nightmare. And then you just give up. So sometimes you do give up and say, forget it, I'm going to the moment, I'm going wherever.
Yeah.
But it's also connected to this society where elders are tossed aside. It is absolutely despicable the way that our society views and treats elders.
I think that, again, it's in the interactions that I know that people have had with some Black colleagues who are older is difficult. And I think that goes back more to what I was describing before. I think there was not this I love myself the way for children of the civil rights era or people who've gone through the civil rights era the way that it is for young people now. But that thing of the institution is in their cold, dead hands and it's not going anywhere is real. And so when Dana, I see you trying to say, like, what is it we can be doing? What is it we can be doing? I mean, I think for me, it still goes to a certain acknowledgement of truths. So when I look at an African-American art history book, it's been interesting to me after teaching it a couple of times too, is that there is an argument that says modern art, 20th century art, was created in Europe by a certain group of people. And so when I would teach, I would be talking about these other artists. And the argument always was, well, but they did it after so-and-so did it, right? And that somehow meant that they were not as great, that they were not as influential. And even when I saw the reinstallation at MoMA, Norman Lewis comes in after de Kooning, right? It's always sort of in relation. And I think that the majority of my white colleagues see that as this this is why you are second tier. I just don't think that they understand what Tracy was mentioning, is that all of those, many of those white male female artists were looking at indigenous work, African work, taking those techniques, taking those the ways you manipulate material to create experimental work, right? That then you don't appreciate when we do it, because you are trying to say that we did it after your discovery of this modern art, right? I mean, the whole narrative is backwards.
Yeah.
And it's very challenging to say to a young student, I know you're looking at the dates and I know you're looking at these things, but and I'm sorry, I don't have the article or the evidence to show you exactly like everything that happened. But I started to piece things into my lectures, like a Navajo blanket. It looks like a modernist painting. You need to embed those things into the learning, or it's always going to be, well, that even the 93 Whitney Biennial, oh, well, all of those artists, they were trained by William Kentridge, or out in Cal Arts by so-and-so, it's always that, oh, well, we were taught by other people rather than the other way around.
That's the point that I was trying to make about antiquity.
Yes.
Because I work in the global South, and
right.
half of the names that you mentioned, none of those artists in the Caribbean have ever heard of them. They're looking at old work, looking at work from Africa. They're looking at work that, men, you remember that the trajectory was, if you're in the English-speaking Caribbean, you're going to England, you're going to Scotland, you're going to Wales to study. We just started coming to the United States, and when I was in university, we went to Howard. I thought Howard was the only university in America, because our teachers that came to Jamaica were Howard graduates, and they told us about Howard. So Howard is revered. I mean, our dentists are physicians. But when you look at contemporary art, when we talk about modern art and contemporary art, modernity, America doesn't own modernity, nor does Europe.
That's right.
So when I was a docent for 14 years at the Perez Art Museum, Miami Art Museum, now the Perez Art Museum, and I would ask, well, what was happening in the region? We have this whole archipelago of islands. We have people all the way over to Suriname and French Guiana. Do you know what was happening there? And then you become the troublemaker, because you're trying to show that there is something else as good or better that didn't exist. And so that has been my struggle here in Miami for the 20, which is why I did my own thing. The artists were I'm not an artist, I'm a medical microbiologist who wanted to be an artist, whose parents said, you're not going to go do no art, you're going to go so you don't have to depend on a man. That was the narrative in our household. You're going to be able to earn. But when I came to live here in 78, and artists were coming back from prestigious schools, taking their portfolio like little higglers from gallery to gallery, begging people to look at their work, and nobody was interested. I said, let's do something for ourselves. So when you hear me talk about the struggle to move forward, and you hear me talk about the struggle to have voice, to have space, it's not something I read about, it's something I've experienced. Going to a room, somebody says, well, I did this 5 months ago. You've been out here laboring for 25 years. So for me, I'm one of the people who I'm ready to leave the stage on the left or the right. I'm not trying to stay here forever. But I'm saying, when you come onto the stage, what are you going to say? How are you going to position yourself? Who are your allies? If you're going to work in these big institutions. If not, we're going to have to start our own. And we don't have an African American museum here in Miami. Folks have been talking about it, we don't have one. So it is really problematic when you look at the next 25 years, which are going to be completely different from what we thought they were going to be a year ago.
But it can also be problematic when you do get an African or African American museum. And like you said earlier, the board has no idea and no knowledge of how to run the institution, or it's replete with white curators. What do you do with that? You know, there's still not a space for you. Even the fact that institutions with white curators that say, oh, we're open to Black artists and blah, 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 they don't understand the trauma associated with you having to have a studio visit with especially a white woman, given the reality of how white supremacy has shown up and the social dynamics that have existed. They don't explore the trauma associated with having to show your art to this person and have them say your art is valid for the African institution. Your art is valid for this institution. If I might expect a white curator from the MoMA to come visit, or from the Met, or from whatever, but from a institution that is focused on African art, and having a
Yeah.
people, they just don't explore the reality of how that feels to an artist.
Yeah.
And that's really important. And it's not, and when you bring it, if you bring it up automatically, it's, oh, Suzanne is a wonderful person. It's like, it ain't about Suzanne. I'm talking about a social reality that we're African who are managing trauma and supposed to be coming to an institution where we're empowered, and having to still prove ourselves to a certain population. That's, you have to vibrate at a higher frequency to really understand that.
Yeah.
And that speaks to that. My first question is like, are we being seen? I'm not just talking about our work. I'm not talking about our external physicality. I'm talking about, do you understand where I come from? Do you understand who my people are? Do you understand how we are our ancestors' Wall Street? So if it's 2021 and we're not in these spaces, and now we have a toe in the door, we still are not being seen for what we bring. And I feel like no matter what our pedigree, we are outside artists. We are outsider artists. We are outsider curators. We are outsider trustees of museums. We are outside their norm. And honestly, why have a problem with it? Why have a problem with it? Why keep fighting this? And why not just say, okay? And I'm being very conscious of time. It's 12:15, so can we go till 12:30? Is that okay? That's
Sure.
I can.
Whatever time on the East Coast.
That's fine.
It's math. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of, I mean, I only have my experience, so I'm trying to think of the ways, like, why was it important to me to be seen? I mean, let's be honest, at first, I just wanted a job, right? So sometimes people would say to me, well, why did you take that internship at MoMA and not at Studio Museum? Because MoMA paid me.
Yeah.
And, and I think as much as we'd like to believe these decisions are made after deep thought and all kinds of options, they don't have the options. And I think some people, when I was coming up, definitely people leave, it's too much. I can't deal with all these white folks, whatever. But I think no one tells you it's not going to happen. Nobody says that to you. They want to be encouraging. They want to, maybe it'll change, maybe. But I also think sometimes when I talk to mentors later, they felt like I thought it was me. I thought I was the problem trying to move through an institution. I didn't understand it as systemic because there weren't enough of us, sort of, right, at certain times. And so want to be hopeful for the next person. Maybe that person will be able to deal with all these things I couldn't deal with. Maybe, you know, we can be seen more. Maybe we'll be stronger. I tend to be more like you, though. I had to find a place where I was the leader, and I was very ambivalent about being a leader because I'd never seen a leader that I liked. I never saw anybody running an organization in the way that I thought it should be run. So when people started to say, Lisa, you need to do this, I was like, hell no. What are you talking about? I'm not going to do this. But I have found in the last year, it's been an amazing experience to be able to say, you know, I don't need necessarily an anti-racist statement. I'm going to show you what it is for a woman to be a leader, a Black woman. And I'm going to show you how different it feels and looks without necessarily, you know, writing it up so that you know, that can be posted everywhere. And I'm hoping more people get that opportunity, feel that opportunity. And that's why I'm a little more excited about what could happen in this sort of smaller institutional space if we can keep those going rather than the larger ones, where there can be more of us who on a regular basis are showing what it means to have transparency in the office. Like everyone knows, everyone understands the budget. Everyone knows why this board member is on our board. Everyone understand, you know, because we're not going to recreate this hierarchy and this other way of working. And I just think that certain institutions are just too large to be malleable like that.
I wanted to bring up a point that I think the elephant is in the room around colorism and who gets chosen.
Right.
When you look at those 47 curators from that article that we all have seen, there is a genotype of bodies that have been selected by these larger institutions to come in. And for me, that is really problematic because when you work in spaces where you see consistently dark-skinned Black women and men, especially from the Francophone Caribbean, go up for positions where they are more than qualified for and never get hired. So that is also in the room as well. And pedigree, Tracy, is important, and I value it and I understand it. But even with pedigree, these dark-skinned human beings are pushed off to the side. So there's an additional trauma. If we're not expected to do that dot on the wall and step away and say that's art, you know, you can't look like us and do that, regardless of how you're going to. No Duchamp here for us, but the contemporary language from the region, I can only talk about where I work a lot in the region. Those artists in little tiny spaces in Guadeloupe and Martinique are doing some amazing work. It's not coming out because they don't have the opportunity. The work is not mobile. They're not being able to show the work all over. But if they were here, they would have a lot of difficulty speaking in that language and tone. So we're still validating the work that our white curators understand.
Right.
If you do a monkey jar that is a contemporary monkey jar, they're asking, how is it sized like that? What are you trying to say? Whereas when you're speaking to a Black curator, there is no such conversation around what is the place of that monkey jar and where is the history for it. So those things are not going to be changed right away, Dana, but I think that the more artists come out and get nurtured in communities where they return to, because, you know, we send our children away to get trained and then they come back to the communities. Those of us in the communities have a responsibility in this genre of work to continue to agitate that this conversation, whether you're a poet or you're a musician, God help you if you're a musician who is doing some off-the-wall contemporary jazz type music. I mean, forget it. There's just no space for you. So how do we get seen? We have to keep doing the work.
I think that's important. too, when you think about these, the curators that we've been talking about, like I feel like I experienced maybe I saw a different version of the article, but I experienced the list a little differently. I was struck by how many dark-skinned curators there were. I was surprised that there were as many as there were, but you know, that's an aside. I feel like I'm not always in the know about everything that's going on because I've had so much, because you know, we've talked about art and
I'm
our
looking at the
artistic
list.
life, but me too. So I was like,
I'm
oh,
looking at the list.
right now for me, I'm focusing quite a bit on figuring out how to promote myself. Like, how can I take, you know, the reins and really self promote to in a way that's going to be significant, so that I have some agency and control over the way that I'm presented, where I'm presented, et cetera, et cetera. And part of that comes back to the fear that we talked about earlier. Rosie talked about how folks, that we have fear of the power that people can have and the damage that they can do to our careers, but also we fear being taken advantage of, you know, signing a gallery agreement with things built into it that are disadvantageous to us as artists, or losing the rights to our work unwittingly because we were unaware. So I think for me now, I'm also trying to figure out how to navigate these institutions that I know are not going to change, in these situations that I know are not going to change, because I feel like I'm going to have to deal with these people. So how can I identify those danger points so that I don't fall a victim to them? And then also, how can I watch what I'm learning and then figure out how to train the next generation, so the next generation of artists is not subject to not only being taken advantage of, but being overrun and overtaken by the fear of losing or being taken advantage of, because that's a whole nother experience when you have that fear within you.
Which I just want to touch on quickly, because as an artist, for you, I'm glad you brought this up.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that happened when I had my gallery in San Francisco for 4 years, and I really did it intentionally because I saw there was, you know, blue chip galleries, and then there were scrappy nonprofits, and there wasn't that much in between where I felt like artists of color were going to be shown. But the more these kind of emerging artists began to learn about the financial system of the art world, you know, as much as transparent as I was, and as much as I could do, they'd still be upset. And ultimately they'd be upset with me, right? Because even one of the earliest lessons I had to say to them was, you know, understand that according to the state, your object right now has no value because it hasn't been sold. You know, in the US, you have to have an invoice, you have to have a sales receipt for something to have value. So they would have shown a work of art 3 times and something would happen in shipping and they have to pay for it. You know, there's nothing for us, for artists, to support their work in these ways that is there for people in the institutions, working in the institutions. And so, especially sometimes when we're talking about curators in the institution, you know, curators aren't really responsible for so many other aspects of the institution, you know, so you can hope for them to do certain things, but there's so many other facets of the financial system and the way that a gallery or museums functions that Black, brown people do not have access to, that is going to keep us from being able to really move anything. But the financial implications of being an artist, we don't talk about enough in school, in art schools, and in other ways, for art people to really understand, you know, what is the, you know, US market value of this object versus what is the value of this, you know, in my process of being an artist, you know, versus, you know, what is the value of this in, you know, the trajectory of the other art that's happening. I mean, there's so many ways to look at it. But ultimately, for Black people, we're just disenfranchised in so many other ways that it means something to have an object we made have a financial value.
Right.
We can't do it without us. I couldn't live in a world without art. I wouldn't want to live in a world without art. All forms of it. I don't know if any of you listened to the Earth, Wind and Fire and Isley Brothers. Even last night, I was dancing, all dancing.
Everybody was.
You know,
Man, it was incredible.
from that alone,
Mhm.
that there is joy. There really is joy to see them getting older and not moving quite the same way. And I'm just kind of looking at myself and saying, oh boy, this is not good. So yeah, I mean, look at this. This is an afternoon where we have found community here, you know, and I'm in Miami. I'm saying not just to be polite, but if you come in, call me, Tracy. Call me, Lisa.
Yes.
Call me, Dana. I'm here.
For
There is a meal for you, and I can show you the Miami that you don't usually get to see. How our neighborhood changed. Joe has redlined our neighborhoods. That will never change, never change.
Yeah.
And so we are the end of the Deep South. And the problems of Mississippi are here. People don't like to talk about it, but they're right here. Right. And how a contemporary artist such as Tracy gets to be fabulous and sexy and wonderful in the Deep South is hard. It's really hard because we have been brought up to be so respectable, right? So poker-faced. And the young people are basically saying, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to be polite. I want to tell you to go F off if I want to, you know? And that doesn't go well, because then you become the artist with the attitude, the one who's problematic, that no curator, they don't even want to come to your studio to see if you have any magical work that they can invite. So when I talk to young people, I only work with the young, because they just feed my soul. I say, we've got to find a way to put the elephant through a needle. And I don't know how you do it, but you have to find a way to do it and find the language and the scholarship so that you can stand behind your work, especially if you're doing social justice work. This is not easy work in this time, you know? So I'm encouraged and a little frightened at what it does to my body. You know, we cannot pretend that the trauma is not real.
This has just been beautiful. We started out talking about institutions and our location within them and how to navigate them, and we ended up doing what Black women do, right? Lifting up one another, lifting up the youth, offering opportunities for connection and truth. And I thank you all so much. I always come away from, I will come away from this conversation feeling lighter and lifted up. And I'm really very grateful for your commitment to yourselves and what you then give to others. And I feel enriched. I definitely feel enriched. I had a thought of how this was gonna go, but it transpired into something far greater. And I wish we could talk all afternoon, but I guess I will ask if there's anything that you want to add to this conversation, and then we will sign off. I don't want to miss anything, any of your platinum nuggets.
A little long. We didn't really talk about the proliferation of curatorial studies programs and what that then meant to the job market, which is also made it very complicated. And I think sort of goes to the fact we're in capitalism, right? So even if it's an educational institution, that institution needs to be successful. And the way to be successful is to promote your students, getting them into the right places, this, that, and the other, right? So there's I just wanted to bring that up with Tracy and her background, that I'm not always looking for the artist with the MFA or even the BFA, right? But I am looking for somebody who is committed to that as a practice, as that they are an artist because that is what they are every day. And with curatorial work, I think I'm still waiting to see where all of these curatorial studies students are going to be able to land, and what that means. How can we resource some of these young people to create the institutions of our dreams rather than trying to continue to fight these larger ones? That's what I'm hoping for.
I love that.
I'd like to talk about in another conversation about the curation and money. I just did a course in Zurich on curation and money, and it's something that as independent curators we don't get a chance to talk about much. And we mentioned it because I have it here in my notes, but that's something I would love to explore in a future conversation or somewhere here.
That would be great. I think we're gonna, this is a 5-series thing with the DeYoung, but I have a feeling it's gonna continue. So
I love that.
I would love to have you all back.
I love that idea. I'm all for your covering the money and curatorial practice. The last time I curated something, I was like, it was really definitely challenging. I mean, I was at the point where I was like, am I going to have to go sell CDs at the gas station? Because I need money for this show and it is next to impossible. It just feels next to impossible to get this money. But I along those same lines, I would love to see those of us who have had an opportunity to be a part of these institutions and spend time in these institutions take the most vital components of what we've learned and take it out into the street. And that's curatorial practice, even preservation. Deb Willis is one of my favorite artists of all time. And at the heart of it is how she said, there were no reference books, so I decided I'm going to make some. And I'm like, that's right, that's my kind of sister. But I love the way that she uplifts up and coming artists, and I also love the fact that she's like, you need references, we're going to take this information and we're going to make sure that people in the community can get them. And the point that she makes is that some of the most important archives of African American art, life, and history exist within our homes, but they're deteriorating in those photo albums with the sticky backs or shoe boxes or whatever. I've rescued my family's entire photo archives. It's like 100 years worth of photos that contextualizes or basically tells the story of Black life in America through my family's photo collection. And I'm so glad to see more and more people doing that. But in terms of like preservation techniques, not only for photos, but also for fabric, I'd like to know how to properly preserve my dad's, Air Force uniform and, whatever else I find in our collection. I inherited a bunch of jewelry from my great aunts when, they made their transition. How do we preserve that and keep that and make sure that future generations have access to it and understand its context? So the last thing I'll say, I really sincerely want to thank you, Dana, for bringing us together. I too feel very fed, and I am honored to have had an opportunity to sit with Miss Rosie and with Lisa, and you, Dana, as well. I always enjoy your company. So thank you for bringing us together for this conversation.
Thank you.
Totally my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for living my favorite quote by the Sufi poet Rumi: wherever you stand, be the soul of that place. And you clearly are.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.